Hi everyone, and welcome back to History Calling, where I bring you new videos every Friday looking at the events of the past. Today we are examining the funeral of Anne of Cleves, fourth wife of Henry VIII and the last of his spouses to die. Anne's funeral in August 1557 is a good example of what happened when royalty died in Tudor England and the individual in question wasn't in disgrace with the reigning monarch, as so many of them were. Her burial in Westminster Abbey was a lavish affair, details of which were recorded by a contemporary source which was later published in 1831 in a book edited by Samuel Bentley and entitled Excerpta historica, or Illustrations of English History. It's this account which I'm using as the main source for this video, and I'll leave it linked in the description box for you, as it contains far more detail than I can fit in here, right down to things like the exact measurements of the canopy which was held over the body during the funeral. What I'm instead going to do today is pick out the key events during the time between Anne's death and her burial and bring them together into a more streamlined and easily digestible narrative than the original, rather rambling source provides. Let's get to it. I already have a video looking at Anne's life, so I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of it here. She was born on the 22nd of September 1515, the daughter of Johann and Maria, Duke and Duchess of Cleves. On the 6th of January 1540, she was married to Henry VIII as his fourth spouse. However, Henry never took to her, and 6 months later the marriage was annulled so that the king could marry one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Catherine Howard. Anne wisely didn't fight Henry on the issue of the annulment, and so he was generous to her in the financial settlement. She was granted the title of the king's sister, along with an income fit for a princess and a range of houses, including Hever Castle in Kent, once home to the family of Anne Boleyn. As part of the annulment, Anne was not allowed to leave England, and so she lived out the remainder of her days in her various homes, surviving long enough to see the fall of Catherine Howard in 1542, Henry's sixth marriage to Catherine Parr in 1543, and the king's death in January 1547. She lived through the reign of Edward VI and, in her last public appearance, attended the coronation of Mary I in September 1553, along with her other one-time stepdaughter, Princess Elizabeth. She died, possibly of cancer, according to biographer Antonia Fraser, at around 3 a.m. on the 16th of July 1557 at Chelsea Manor in London. She was 41 years old. As the third lady in the kingdom after Mary and Elizabeth, Anne was entitled to a grand funeral, and she got one. In her last will and testament, written just a few days before she died and also printed in the Bentley book, she asked that her body be buried where it shall please God. Then later in the document added that she would like our body buried according to the Queen's will and pleasure, and that we may have the suffrages of the Holy Church according to the Catholic faith, wherein we end our life in this transitory world. This is interesting, as Anne had previously been a Lutheran. At some point, however, she had converted to Catholicism, possibly in her final years, when Mary I reintroduced that faith as the official religion of England. Anne had already shown in her dealings with Henry during their annulment 17 years earlier that she was prepared to follow whatever lead the monarch set in order to ensure a quiet and safe life for herself, and converting, at least outwardly, to Catholicism in order to please Mary certainly follows that pattern of behaviour. Immediately after Anne's death, her body was embalmed and placed in a coffin which was kept in Chelsea Manor in a chamber near the stairs, where she lay in state, covered by a rich pall of cloth of gold, garnished with 6 scutcheons, meaning escutcheons, of her arms, and with wax tapers burning around the coffin all day and night. Daily masses were said before the body during this time and after Tuesday the 27th of July, on which day it was moved into a lower chamber similarly decorated. Throughout, Anne's remains were never left alone, and instead a constant vigil was maintained by a series of gentlemen, gentlewomen, and yeomen, until it was time to be taken for burial. This occurred at 2 p.m. on the 3rd of August, and was a scene of great ceremony in of itself. Anne's coffin was covered with 5 yards of black velvet and placed on an open chariot draped in velvet, fringed with silk, and decorated with her arms, which you can see a drawing of here. The 4 horses which pulled this chariot from Chelsea to Charing Cross and then on to Westminster Abbey were also draped in black cloth, as were their bridles, and had additional escutcheons showing Anne's arms attached to headpieces they wore. Each horse carried a henchman with his hood on his head. The body was escorted to the abbey by a large number of her former servants and government and church officials, including 30 monks, her 4 chaplains, her doctor, the constable of the Tower of London, some of Mary's councillors, Anne's executors, the abbot of Westminster, and the Bishop of London. The chief mourner was the Marchioness of Winchester, formerly Elizabeth Seymour and sister of Queen Jane Seymour. This portrait, once thought to be Catherine Howard, may in fact be Elizabeth, and even shows her in mourning clothes, though not for Anne. All of Anne's mourners were similarly decked out in black, however, and displaying the one-time Queen's coat of arms, as were their mounts. I don't have an image of this procession to show you, however I did find this beautiful picture from the British Library of the funeral procession of Elizabeth I in 1603, which is remarkably similar to what was described for Anne, and which I think is a great visual reference for you to help you understand what the written description is trying to convey. Here you can see the 4 horses at the front, all decked out in black and displaying the royal coat of arms, including on their headpieces. In this case they are riderless, however. Elizabeth has an open chariot similar to Anne's and is surrounded by mourners wearing black, with their hoods up and carrying banners showing her coat of arms, with a black canopy over the body. This too, as we're about to hear, resembled Anne's procession. If you'd like to see more of Elizabeth's funeral, I'll leave a link to this image and a few others in the description box for you. Upon reaching the abbey, Anne's coffin was brought to the west door, which had been hung with black cloth and yet more displays of her arms. It was also filled with lighted tapers. The remains were carried in beneath a canopy which was held up by 4 men with hoods on their heads who had to be of equal height so that the corners of the canopy would sit evenly. Anytime the coffin itself had to be borne on men's shoulders, they too had to be about the same height, no doubt for the same reason. Once inside, it was placed beneath a specially constructed, elaborate hearse, which was situated in the middle of the square plat, which I think probably means the square plate, between the high altar and the choir at Westminster. This square section of flooring, which you can see in this photograph, is still there and is where, among other things, Prince William and Kate Middleton stood to be married. Just a little bit of trivia for you. Nowadays, of course, we think of a hearse as being a vehicle for transporting a coffin, but at this point in time the word meant, to quote the Oxford English Dictionary, an elaborate framework originally intended to carry a large number of lighted tapers and other decorations over the bier or coffin while placed in the church at the funerals of distinguished persons. With Anne's remains now beneath this structure, which was decorated with her arms and her motto, Spes meo in Deo est, meaning my hope is in God, some of the mourners, including the aged Duchess of Norfolk, sat next to it on seats covered in black and with cushions on them to make life more comfortable. A funeral dirge was sung, and when the choir had finished, the mourners withdrew for the most part into another chamber and went home. 4 gentlemen and 8 yeomen were left to watch the corpse overnight, but no women did so, the reason given being that they were not well at ease. Make of that what you will. Perhaps it was felt that sitting in a draughty abbey all night was no job for England's female elite. Instead, 9 of the women had to be back at the abbey at 7 a.m. the next day, the 4th of August, for the next stage of the ceremony. They, and the rest of the mourners for that matter, duly showed up that morning, again wearing their elaborate mourning clothes, for the grand finale of this most elaborate of funerals. Offerings of gold were made by the chief mourner, then a mass was held and the attendees went on to have breakfast in a nearby room. Afterwards they came back, paid their respects to the altar and to the corpse, and a requiem mass was given by the Bishop of London. More offerings were made and the funeral sermon was given by Dr. John Feckenham, Abbot of Westminster, who advised the assembled personages to amend our lives while we had time, and warned them that envy and wrath were the worst of the 7 deadly sins. After the sermon there was another mass, after which the mourners who were not involved in the actual burial left. The funeral had now reached its final stage. The coffin was carried, still under a canopy, to the place of burial, which is on the south side of the high altar. Anne's household servants broke on their own heads their staves and rods, that means their staves and rods of office, casting them into the sepulchre with lamentation. This signified that their service to their deceased mistress was now over. Immediately afterwards, 2 trestles and a table were set over the top of the grave, covered with a rich pall of cloth of gold, and thereon a cross and 2 white branches, there the hearse standing whole, still with a presentation, and the velvet pall thereon, together with a cross between 2 white branches, which so did stand until Monday was a fortnight. After that it was taken down. The remaining men who had assisted with the burial remained in the abbey to enjoy a sumptuous dinner at the cost of the executors, and after dining at their pleasure, they departed. Anne's grave was later marked by a monument which was never finished and which is hard to see nowadays as it is obscured by some later monuments. It bears her initials, AC, and is decorated with a crown and skulls and crossed bones. You can see another instance of her coat of arms on the right-hand side of it. According to Westminster Abbey's website, it was probably made by Theodore Havius of Cleves. A simple inscription was added over 400 years later, which reads, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born 1515, died 1557. Incidentally, if you're wondering where Queen Mary and Princess Elizabeth were in all of this, the answer is that they weren't present. It was against the custom of the time for a monarch to attend a funeral. Henry VIII didn't attend Jane Seymour's funeral for this reason, for instance. And while Elizabeth could have been there, it's worth remembering the awkward situation she was in 1557. She was in Mary's bad graces by this point and suspected of involvement in a plot to oust her sister, though the Queen was publicly supporting her on the advice of her husband, Philip II of Spain. Elizabeth had left court early during the Christmas celebrations in 1556 after pressure was brought to bear on her to marry a foreign prince of Philip's choice, and she was likely trying to avoid coming to London again. It seems unlikely, therefore, that she would have volunteered to do so for Anne's funeral. If you'd like to learn more about this, see my video on the life of Elizabeth I, Part 2. Anne's death and burial brought to an end the long and tangled tale of the 6 wives of Henry VIII, which had begun all the way back in 1509, before she was even born, when Henry had married his sister-in-law, Catherine of Aragon. As I argued in my video on her life, I think Anne was overall the luckiest of Henry's wives. Though 41 is not old, she lived longer than Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, and she lived and died well respected by her adopted people. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on so you never miss an upload. You can also find me over on Instagram, where my username is historycalling. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below, along with links to some books, TV shows and movies which cover Anne's life. For more on Henry's wives, check out my 6 Wives of Henry VIII playlist, or you may also enjoy my Tudor Monarchs playlist. I'll be back next week with a new video, and until then, as always, keep learning.